Welcome to Daily Scripture Reading. I do not own the rights to this music. 2 Kings chapter 4, the King James Version. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant my husband is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take unto him my two sons to be bondmen. And Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in the house? And she said, Thine handmaid hath not anything in the house, save a pot of oil. Then he said, Go borrow thee vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and shalt pour out into all those vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So she went from him and shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, Bring me yet a vessel. And he said unto her, There is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, Go sell the oil and pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was, that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And she said unto her husband, Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, and a table, and a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be, when he cometh to us, that he shall turn in thither. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and he turned into the chamber and lay there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Verily she hath no child, and her husband is old. And he said, Call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my Lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thine handmaid. And the woman conceived, and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to a lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon, and then died. And she went up and laid on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door upon him, and went out, and she called unto her husband, and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God, and come again. And he said, Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It shall be well. Then she saddled a donkey, and said to her servant, Drive and go forward. Slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi his servant, Behold, yonder is that Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, It is well. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet, but Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, Let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. Then she said, Did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up thy loins, and take my staff in thine hand, and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not, and if any salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them, and laid the staff upon the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him, and told him, saying, The child is not awaked. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead, and laid upon his bed. He went in therefore, and shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands, and stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she was come in unto him, he said, Take up thy son. Then she went in and fell at his feet, and bowed herself to the ground, and took up her son, and went out. And Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said unto his servant, Set on the great pot, and sieve the pottage for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered thereof wild gourds, his lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. So they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat thereof. But he said, Then bring meal. And he cast it into the pot. And he said, Pour out for the people, that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. And there came a man from Baal-Shalisha, and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and full ears of corn in the husk thereof. And he said, Give unto the people, that they may eat. And his servitor said, What should I set this before 100 men? I'm going to repeat that. And his servitor said, What? Should I set this before 100 men? He said again, Give the people, that they may eat. For thus saith the Lord, They shall eat and shall leave thereof. So he set it before them, and they did eat, and left thereof according to the word of the Lord. The Amplified Version of 2 Kings chapter 4. Now one of the wives of a man of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha for help, saying, Your servant my husband is dead, and you know that your servant reverently feared the Lord, but the creditor is coming to take my 2 sons to be his slaves in payment for a loan. Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have of value in the house?" She said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house except a small jar of olive oil." Then he said, "Go borrow containers from all your neighbors, empty containers, and not just a few. Then you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour out the oil you have into all these containers, and you shall set aside each one when it is full." So she left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They were bringing her the containers as she poured the oil. When the containers were all full, she said to her son, "Bring me another container." And he said to her, "There is not a one left." Then the oil stopped multiplying. Then she came and told the man of God. He said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest." Now there came a day when Elisha went over to Shunem, where there was a prominent and influential woman, and she persuaded him to eat a meal. Afterward, whenever he passed by, he stopped there for a meal. She said to her husband, "Behold, I sense that this is a holy man of God, who frequently passes our way. Please let us make a small, fully walled upper room on the housetop and put a bed there for him, with a table, a chair, and a lampstand. Then whenever he comes to visit us, he can turn in there." One day he came there and turned into the upper room and lay down to rest. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and she stood before him. Now he said to Gehazi, "Say to her now, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can I do for you? Would you like to be mentioned to the king or to the captain of the army?" She answered, "I live among my own people in peace and security, and need no special favors." Later, Elisha said, "What then is to be done for her?" Gehazi answered, "Well, she has no son and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." So Gehazi called her, and she came and stood in the doorway. Elisha said, "At this season next year, you will embrace a son." She said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." But the woman conceived and gave birth to a son at that season, the next year, just as Elisha had said to her. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. But he said to his father, "My head, my head." The man said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." When he had carried and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then he died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door of the small upper room behind him and left. Then she called to her husband and said, "Please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, so that I may run to the man of God and return." He said, "Why are you going to him today? It is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath." And she said, "It will be all right." Then she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, "Drive the animal fast. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you." So she set out and came to the man of God at Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi his servant, "Look, there is this Shunammite woman. Please run now to meet her and ask her, 'Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?'" And she answered, "It is well." When she came to the mountain to the man of God, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi approached to push her away, but the man of God said, "Let her alone, for her soul is desperate and troubled within her. And the Lord has hidden the reason from me, and has not told me. Then she said, Did I ask for a son for my Lord? Did I not say, Do not give me false hope? Then he said to Gehazi, Gird up your loins, prepare now, and take my staff in your hand, and go to the woman's house. If you meet any man along the way, do not greet him, and if a man greets you, do not stop to answer him. And lay my staff on the face of the boy as soon as you reach the house. The mother of the child said, As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. So Elisha rose and followed her. Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid the staff on the boy's face. But there was no sound or response from the boy. So he turned back to meet Elisha and told him, The boy has not awakened, revived. When Elisha came into the house, the child was dead and lying on his bed. So he went in, shut the door behind the two of them, and prayed to the Lord. Then he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. And as he stretched himself out on him and held him, the boy's skin became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up again and stretched himself out on him. And the boy sneezed 7 times, and he opened his eyes. Then Elisha called Gehazi and said, Call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came to him, he said, Pick up your son. She came and fell at his feet, bowing herself to the ground in respect and gratitude. Then she picked up her son and left. Elisha came back to Gilgal during a famine in the land. The sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said to his servant, Put on the large pot and cook stew for the sons of the prophets. Then one of them went into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered from it a lapful of wild gourds, and came and cut them up into the pot of stew. Although they did not know what they were, they served it for the men to eat. But as they ate the stew, they cried out, O man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat it. But he said, Bring flour. And he threw it into the pot and said, Serve it for the people, so that they may eat. Then there was nothing harmful in the pot. Now at another time a man from Baal-Shalisha came and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread, and fresh ears of grain in the husk, in his sack. And Elisha said, Give it to the people affected by the famine, so that they may eat. His servant said, How am I to set only this before 100 hungry men? He said, Give it to the people, so that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, They shall eat and have some left. So he set it before them, and they ate and left some, in accordance with the word of the Lord. The New Living Translation of 2 Kings chapter 4. One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, My husband who served you is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord. But now a creditor has come, threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves. What can I do to help you? Elisha asked. Tell me, what do you have in the house? Nothing at all, except a flask of olive oil, she replied. And Elisha said, Borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it is filled. So she did as she was told. Her sons kept bringing jars to her, and she filled one after another. Soon every container was full to the brim. "Bring me another jar," she said to one of her sons. "There aren't any more," he told her. And then the olive oil stopped flowing. When she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, "Now sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left over." One day, Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. She said to her husband, "I am sure this man who stops in from time to time is a holy man of God. Let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp. Then he will have a place to stay whenever he comes by." One day, Elisha returned to Shunem, and he went up to this upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her." When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army?" "No," she replied. "My family takes good care of me." Later, Elisha asked Gehazi, "What can we do for her?" Gehazi replied, "She doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man." "Call her back again," Elisha told him. When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, "Next year at this time you will be holding a son in your arms." "No, my Lord," she cried. "O man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that." But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant, and at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elisha had said. One day, when her child was older, he went out to help his father, who was working with the harvesters. Suddenly he cried out, "My head hurts! My head hurts!" His father said to one of the servants, "Carry him home to his mother." So the servant took him home, and his mother held him on her lap. But around noontime he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, then shut the door and left him there. She sent a message to her husband, "Send one of the servants and a donkey, so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back." "Why go today?" he asked. "It is neither a new moon festival nor a Sabbath." But she said, "It will be all right." So she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, "Hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you to." As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance. He said to Gehazi, "Look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, 'Is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child?'" Yes, the woman told Gehazi, "Everything is fine." But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. Gehazi began to push her away, but the man of God said, "Leave her alone. She is deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what it is." Then she said, "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, 'Don't deceive me and get my hopes up'?" Then Elisha said to Gehazi, "Get ready to travel. Take my staff and go. Don't talk to anyone along the way. Go quickly and lay the staff on the child's face." But the boy's mother said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and you yourself live, I won't go home unless you go with me." So Elisha returned with her. Gehazi hurried on ahead. and laid the staff on the child's face, but nothing happened. There was no sign of life. He returned to meet Elisha and told him, "The child is dead." When Elisha arrived, the child was indeed dead, lying there on the prophet's bed. He went in alone and shut the door behind him and prayed to the Lord. Then he lay down on the child's body, placing his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on the child's hands. And as he stretched out on him, the child's body began to grow warm again. Elisha got up, walked back and forth across the room once, and then stretched himself out again on the child. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Then Elisha summoned Gehazi. "Call the child's mother," he said. And when she came in, Elisha said, "Here, take your son." She fell at his feet and bowed before him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Then she took her son in her arms and carried him downstairs. Elisha now returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land. One day, as the group of prophets was seated before him, he said to his servant, "Put a large pot on the fire and make some stew for the rest of the group." One of the young men went out into the field to gather herbs and came back with a pocket full of wild gourds. He shredded them and put them into the pot without realizing they were poisonous. Some of the stew was served to the men, but after they had eaten a bite or two, they cried out, "Man of God, there's poison in this stew." So they would not eat. Elisha said, "Bring me some flour." Then he threw it into the pot and said, "Now it's all right. Go ahead and eat." And then it did not harm them. One day a man from Baal Shalisha brought the man of God a sack of fresh grain and 20 loaves of barley, bread made from the first grain of his harvest. Elisha said, "Give it to the people so they can eat." "What?" his servant exclaimed. "Feed 100 people with only this?" But Elisha repeated, "Give it to the people so they can eat. For this is what the Lord says, everyone will eat, and there will even be some left over." And when they gave it to the people, there was plenty for all, and some left over, just as the Lord had promised. The end. God bless you, and thank you for joining me today.